If you're still having any doubts about Kaeya's allegiances, considering that the founder of the Abyss Order is a fellow Alberich, nothing he can say can really ease your feelings of distrust towards him. The more he denies his affiliation to the Abyss, the more suspicious he seems. However, there's still a way he can assuage your doubtfulness, and that is through building a case for himself by laying out evidence that's favorable to him. In his case, the best evidence would be the collection of all his actions, from planned to candid, all of which you can find in his recently released hangout. Because of the prerequisite requirements, you need to complete the Caribert Archon quest before you can access this hangout, so knowing what you know about him from that quest, you may be more inclined to ask, who is Kaeya really? Luckily, I think this very hangout has some very interesting answers to that question. But before I begin rambling about our very intriguing Kyrian Mondstadter, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my channel if you think you'd enjoy these types of character analyses. Kaeya's hangout starts in a very weird but rather adorable way. I mean, he's whistling at a dusk bird and trying to befriend it like your local Disney princess would. And although the scene seems random, it does tell you what to expect about Kaeya, that you should expect nothing less of pure eccentricity. Because even though he's clearly the type to want to get along well with others, he's not one to force himself to fit every social norm. He makes confusing comments or jokes, he solves problems in odd ways, and he finds amusement in things you wouldn't normally expect to be interesting. And interestingly, he doesn't really find shame in talking to birds, saying he tells jokes to his lucky coin, making up lame excuses to get his hands on prized bottles of wine from the Dawn Winery, or bringing a whole-ass costume to a leisurely walk. Heck, he doesn't even care if he sounds like he's using government money for his own personal expenditures because he knows the funds are set aside for his trip. The only thing he's really ashamed of is singing, I guess, which, by the way, is really adorable. Thus, hanging out with Kaeya can be a mix of awkward, exciting, or heartwarming. However, it's not just that he's weird for the sake of it. You can sense that even though he is hiding his true self in terms of his cultural background, you can tell that to some degree he is committed to being his authentic self in terms of showcasing his personality and attitude, including some sides of himself that might prevent him from getting along with others. Although interestingly, we do see him have meaningful interpersonal connections and relationships with others, but now we can tell that it's because of a combination of his natural charm and his keen understanding of other people's needs. And it's not mainly because he completely acts according to society's rules. Yes, Kaeya is putting on a facade, hiding his deep-seated anxieties and fears about his background, his place in society, and his destiny. However, I'd assert that those are okay things to keep hidden since these are deeply personal matters. What I do find admirable about his persona is not that it shows literally all sides of himself, but that it's not necessarily as rigidly curated as you might imagine from someone who's hiding parts of himself. You can see that while he does benefit a lot from fitting into society as a form of personal protection, it's ultimately not his main goal, and he's willing to deviate from the norm quite a bit, even if that often puts the spotlight on him rather than drawing attention away from him. Thus, you can sense that he's not the type to completely erase his uniqueness in a huge attempt to please the general public. And in a sense, that's a sign of him learning how to live freely, which is the philosophy of the idyllic nation he currently resides in. When you're the type of person who tries too hard to paint and project an ideal picture of yourself, your strategy would be to showcase the best parts of yourself and hide the ugly sides of your character. On one hand, Kaeya does the latter quite often, but you would notice in his hangout that he's also not so persistent when it comes to letting people know about his kindness. Although I did mention in my old analysis that I think part of the reason why he doesn't tend to let people know about the good things that he's done is because showing people he cares for them exhibits a certain level of vulnerability that he tries to guard. But on top of that, something new that I realized from his hangout is that part of it is because his kindness comes rather candidly and naturally. arising in situations when his help is required, instead of calculating ways to do good in such a way that benefits him. I mean, the entire premise of why we even met him in the first place during his hangout was based on Kaeya volunteering to help Jean resolve issues on trade safety with Sumeru. So that goes to show the extent of his easygoing but initiative-based helpfulness. This led me to think that maybe Kaeya doesn't laud himself as someone who's also kind and generous, because he himself probably doesn't realize how sweet and thoughtful he's being, since it comes to him rather effortlessly. And I think he also wants to preserve this part of himself that's genuine by not ruining it with bragging and all that. It's also interesting that this has been his approach to looking after others even from when he was a child or a teenager, because Adeline told the story of how he helped Diluc scrub several barrels of wine, but he did it discreetly without Diluc's knowledge. For someone who's so secretive and keeps their past so hidden, and his true intentions so well guarded, you'd expect that most of what Kaeya keeps a secret constitutes his dark side, so to speak. However, this hangout tells us that Kaeya's secretiveness also extends to positive things that he does out of the goodness of his heart. With that, I hope it would allow fans to broaden their perspective of what secrecy entails. When it comes to characters who keep a lot of things hidden from us, Genshin fans tend to label them as sus, implying that their secret keeping is malicious in nature. However, Kaeya's hangout invites us to reconsider that assumption we have about not just him but many other characters in general. Maybe there can be a way for us to understand where someone else is coming from without forcing them to divulge everything to us, especially when it can ruin their personal sense of security. With that, it's amusing to see how Kaeya's secrecy paves the way for his own brand of kindness to arise, and oddly enough, this might be considered authentic. Although Kaeya is obviously rather selfless with his desire to assist others in times of need, that doesn't mean that he always turns down favors or is oblivious to people's desires to exchange favors. You can see that with him accepting Captain Wu's offer to take him out for fishing, with him offering Venti some apple cider in exchange for a request on behalf of Sister Grace. Then he joins the singing practice after Venti dedicated a very, very powerful poem to him. He also invokes the principle of reciprocity when asking for special wine from Diluc by citing the fact that he deserves it in exchange for giving Diluc a lamp from Sumeru as a gift. So does this discount his selflessness? Of course not. My interpretation is that his recognition of the idea of exchanging favors tells us that his acts of kindness come effortlessly but they're not impersonal. It's not that he's always consistently helping random people for absolutely no reason other than that he wants to be a dedicated martyr or something. No, on the contrary, he's a government official of Mondstadt, which is a very small city so everyone knows each other, which means that more often than not, he's helping people whom he knows and who know him. Based on that, a relationship of mutual trust is formed, and the people he assists will be more inclined to give something back to him in return, because I don't think many people would want to constantly receive things without giving much. Kaeya's joke about keeping a ledger of favors is a sort of parody of this idea, but in its true essence it follows the concept of mutual assistance, something that even a bleeding heart and generous soul like Kaveh invokes. It's a way for community members to empower each other from the ground up rather than creating a sense of inequality based on the giver and the receiver. If you let someone always receive your help without relying on them as well, it can create an odd kind of power dynamic where one is completely reliant on the other. And I think Kaeya is sufficiently aware of this idea in order for him to avoid creating that dynamic, except for his dealings with informants. It also recognizes the very close-knit Mondstadt network because even without necessarily putting great effort into it, mutual assistance is already quite baked into Mondstadt society because you can easily identify each person's social contribution and you can kind of interpret that as everyone helping each other out to some degree. Even when it comes to the practice of gift giving, it's often done with close friends, so when we saw Kaeya giving souvenir gifts to his friends, that exhibits his recognition of all the things they've done for him, whether it be through concrete favors or simply emotional support. So we can see that Kaeya's kindness is definitely not detached, and we can see through his acts of kindness just how well integrated he is into Mondstadt society already at this point. As we've established by means of me drilling it into your head like I'm using a polearm charged attack, Kaeya is definitely kind, but it doesn't stem from a soft heart but a strong will as well, because he sticks to what he believes is right. We can discern this from his role as Prince Kubad, which was a very, very, very thinly veiled allegory for his personal struggles. In that play, we find the character of Prince Kubad choosing to maintain a truce between his nation and his enemies, not mainly out of pity or gentleness, but out of his keen understanding of what the right thing is to do for the benefit of society. It goes to show that constantly making the right ethical choices can't be sustained simply by acting on your own goodwill, but also by firmly opposing what you believe is wrong for the sake of maintaining justice. In a sense, doing good is not only a matter of hearts and flowers, but a matter of defiance as well. In fact, New Mondstadt and the post-aristocracy Mondstadt were born out of rebellion. I think his attitude and the allegorical play so far have proven to us that he's likely going to take Mondstadt's side when push comes to shove, considering he's built a lot of connections there, he cares for the people there, and his ideals seem to align with the nation. And unlike your typical Mondstadter, Kaeya is given the opportunity to assert his allegiance in a defiant manner. He's going to put his foot down and act according to what he believes in. It's both evident not just in Kubad's character itself, but also in the improv stint he did where he decided to challenge fate itself and exercise his free will. I do honestly think that Kaeya's sense of conviction is one of his most admirable qualities, because this is what motivates him to act according to his moral compass, and it could also be what pushes him to work towards living authentically, because it's very hard to do that if you don't really believe in your own ideals. It's also something that will protect him from getting sucked into someone else's will, even if that someone else has an incredibly large influence over him. So my personal interpretation is that Kaeya is no longer in the process of choosing between two sides anymore, but rather his conviction is still overwhelming at this point, that the idea of having to follow through with such a brave stance and taking actions to support it probably makes him anxious. Thus, I think he needs to remember the support his fellow Mondstadters have given him, so that he will feel empowered to make his choice to defy destiny in the future, just as he made Kubad do. It's worth noting that Venti already gave Kaeya such a powerful form of encouragement through the poem he composed for him, with the image of a boat continuing to push onwards, reassuring Kaeya that a bright future is possible for him in spite of his struggles, as long as he's willing to defy the darkness, of course, with the blessing of Mondstadt's ideals of freedom. While that play Kaeya took part in clearly is a representation of his struggles with his Alberich background, I think the circumstances of his participation in the play also point towards an interesting aspect of Kaeya's lore. If you've been following me for some time already, you'd know that I do definitely believe that Kaeya is South Asian, well, the Tivat version of South Asian, that is. First off, I think his hangout did confirm that his skin follows Sumeru fashion norms, considering that it was deemed to be acceptable enough as a costume for a prince from Sumeru. And on top of that, the fact that Kaeya was able to play the role of a Sumerian prince, whose real actor must have likely been a desert dweller, likely points to Kaeya's appearance fitting the role as well. I don't know, it's just because the actor for King Kabus Darbil was very particular about immersion, and it would really break the immersion very intensely if Kaeya looked way too different from the other actors. It's also worth noting that his relationship with the actors and the people at the restaurant felt very easygoing, making it seem like he fit particularly well among them, more than he'd usually fit in when going to some other country aside from Mondstadt. He was also called good-looking by one of the waitresses there, and that's surprisingly not common for Kaeya to get called good-looking in-game, so I really do think he fits well into Sumeru beauty standards. Even the way he found it so easy to pick out what to order in the restaurant and his general familiarity with the stories from Sumeru makes it seem like he has some ties to that area, which isn't so far-fetched considering Kainria's door is right under Gavire Lajavard. However, I will point out that Kubad and Kuba seem to be characters of Iranian origin, while Kaeya has repeatedly been implied to be Indian with his name, peacock constellation, and even the appearance of his new outfit. Still, the point stands because there was some certain degree of cultural mixing among the two countries long before, especially in northern India. And still, at least an Indian person can better approximate the role of an Iranian character compared to someone who's like Caucasian or East Asian. So yeah, I really do think his comfort with being in Sumeru does point to some likely origins there, even though he does prefer to live in Mondstadt, of course. I don't know, it's just really nice to consider since Genshin is very slow at giving us hints about Kaeya's likely Sumeru origins, but this hangout seems to be feeding us a little bit of those. Anyway, if you want a more detailed description of my theory, you can check my previous videos on that matter. So anyway, what do all of these pieces of evidence say about Kaeya as a whole? Well, the point of this analysis is not to aggressively push forth pro-Kaeya propaganda, but to acknowledge his humanity beyond his surname and the ominous origins it implies. The point is not that Kaeya is an angel that everyone has to bow down to and worship. No, the real angel is Venti, we all know that. But what I want you to realize is that Kaeya is someone who has had a difficult upbringing, and upon setting foot in Mondstadt, he was invited to uphold its value of freedom. And so Kaeya has taken up the offer of this new home and is consistently striving to understand himself better and act based on what he truly believes in. His goal seems to be to live freely and authentically in spite of the various setbacks to this, and his hangout shows us his progress towards achieving that. We can see how his conviction has aided him in understanding his own values and weighing the world against them, and how that manifests in his very colorful character. I think we can see that both his shadiness and his kindness, his anxieties and his hopes, his pain and his power complement each other and can coexist within this very wonderful person as he continues to develop himself. Okay, but I guess you're right, this really is pro-Kaeya propaganda. I don't think I should deny it anymore. Anyway, if you enjoyed this summarized thematic analysis of Kaeya's hangout and what that means for his character, or if you are just obsessed with this lovely Disney princess like I am, you might like my other videos, especially because I've done a lot of them on Kaeya. So why not consider subscribing to my channel to catch more videos like this next time? If you want to fangirl over this amazing character together, you can also reach out to me on Twitter for a nice conversation. Anyway, that's all for today, and I hope this hangout was very inspiring and cathartic for you as it was for me. If you haven't gotten Kaeya's skin, I hope you do soon so you can enjoy his new look personally. That's all for today, and I'll catch you in the next one.